You think you're climbing the golden stairs to heaven, but you're actually just sweating on an endless spiritual treadmill. We are bleeding ourselves dry trying to polish a painted-on facade of perfect attendance and rigid theological gatekeeping, completely oblivious to the fact that our soul is starving. Let's shatter the golden calf of religious performance and break free. Today we're exposing 4 subtle signs that you've traded a real relationship with Jesus for a religious performance. These signs are quiet. They don't look like rebellion, they actually look like devotion. That's what makes them so dangerous. So stay with me all the way to the end, because after we expose all 4, I'm going to hand you 3 practical steps to walk away from the treadmill and back into His arms for good. Number 1. The silent burnout of spiritual performance. Here's the first sign. You've started treating your faith like a corporate KPI instead of a relationship. Quiet time becomes a box to check. Bible reading becomes a streak you're afraid to break. Church attendance becomes a scorecard you keep in the back of your mind. And underneath it all, you're exhausted, because a checklist never says, "well done." It just hands you a new list the moment you finish the old one. Think about a hamster on a wheel. It runs and runs faster and faster, and the wheel spins right along with it. But the hamster never actually goes anywhere. It just gets more tired standing in the exact same spot. That's what performance-based faith feels like. You're moving, you're busy, you're spiritual on paper, but you're standing still with God because a checklist can't love you back, and it definitely can't fill the place in your heart that was only ever built for a relationship. Here's the thing that makes it worse. The more tired you get, the harder you grip the checklist, because you start to believe the exhaustion itself is proof you're doing something right. I must be close to God. Look how hard I'm working. But burnout was never the evidence of intimacy. It's usually the evidence of its absence. And here's the part nobody talks about. That exhaustion doesn't stay inside you. It leaks out onto everyone around you. When your faith is a performance, you start grading other people's performances too, even if you never say it out loud. You clock who missed church last week. You notice whose theology isn't quite as sharp as yours. You quietly rank people in your head by how together their walk with God looks from the outside. Jesus warned about this exact trap in Matthew 23:27, calling out religious leaders who looked beautiful on the outside but were full of decay within. An exhausted, performance-driven heart doesn't just hurt you, it slowly turns you into a critic of everyone else's walk, which is exactly where sign 2 picks up. Number 2, the rise of theological gatekeeping over grace. That leads to the second sign. You care more about being doctrinally right than actually loving people the way Christ did. You'll spend an hour perfecting the theology in a comment section, correcting a stranger's interpretation word by word, but you can't remember the last time you sat with someone who was falling apart and just listened without trying to fix or correct them. This is modern Pharisee syndrome. The Pharisees knew their scripture inside and out. They could quote the law forward and backward, debate its finer points for hours. But Jesus told them in John 5:39 that they searched the scriptures while completely missing the one the scriptures pointed to the entire time. That's the trap. You can be so busy defending the map that you never actually walk the road it's pointing you toward. Meanwhile, Jesus himself kept walking straight past the religious gatekeepers to sit with the exact people they'd written off. Tax collectors, the sick, the outcasts, the people the correct theology said to avoid, and he offered them radical grace instead of a doctrine test. He didn't quiz the woman at the well on her theology before he offered her living water. He didn't require the bleeding woman to have her doctrine straightened out before he let her touch his robe and be healed. Gatekeeping feels like guarding the truth. It feels responsible, even noble. But Jesus never asked people to pass a theology exam before he loved them. And he never made someone earn their way past the gate before he'd sit with them. And that legalism doesn't just affect how we treat outsiders online or in the pews next to us. It quietly changes why we even show up to church in the first place, which brings us to sign 3. Number, like this video and subscribe if this is hitting home, because the next 2 signs are the ones most people never see coming. And honestly, they're the 2 that convicted me the most while writing this. Number 3, measuring attendance instead of transformation. Sign 3. You've started measuring your spiritual health by attendance instead of transformation. Sunday service, small group, volunteer shift, worship team, the calendar looks full. On paper, you look like one of the most committed people in the building, but your actual prayer life? Bone dry. You haven't had an honest, unscripted conversation with God in months. You talk about Him constantly, but you barely talk to Him anymore. Picture a car with a full tank of gas that never leaves the driveway. It looks ready to go somewhere important. The gauge says full. The engine runs fine when you start it up, but it's not actually taking you anywhere, because a full tank means nothing if the car never moves. That's what church activity without private transformation looks like. A full calendar, an empty tank, and a whole lot of motion that never turns into movement. Tracking those religious metrics feels safe. You can point to your attendance streak, your volunteer hours, your small group record, and feel secure, like you've built a case for yourself. But Jesus never measured discipleship by how often people showed up to the temple courts. He measured it by whether a life was actually changing from the inside out. In Matthew 15:8, he put it plainly. People can honor Him with their lips while their hearts stay far from Him. That's the exact gap we're talking about: full attendance, empty heart. And when the metrics quietly replace the relationship, that same fear of not measuring up starts bleeding into the most private part of your life: how you deal with your own failures when nobody's watching. Number 4. Hiding behind a mask of modern self-righteousness. Which brings us to the fourth and most dangerous sign. You can't be honest about your struggles anymore because you're terrified of cracking the holy facade you've built. You smile in the lobby, you say, "I'm blessed," on autopilot when someone asks how you're doing, but you'd never admit what you're actually wrestling with: the doubt, the addiction, the marriage that's falling apart, the anger you can't shake. Because what if someone looks at you differently? What if the mask slips in front of the wrong person? That fear keeps you performing wellness instead of pursuing healing. It keeps you smiling through a Sunday service while quietly drowning Monday through Saturday. And here's the tragedy. The very community that's supposed to be your lifeline becomes the place you're most afraid to be honest, because it's the place with the highest cost if the mask ever comes off. But look at how James 5:16 frames it. We're told to confess our sins to one another so we can be healed, not so we can be judged. Healing was never meant to happen in isolation behind a locked door. Jesus never demanded a flawless mask before He'd sit with you. Remember the woman caught in adultery, dragged in front of a crowd ready to condemn her? Jesus didn't hand her a checklist to clean up first. He said, "Neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more." The grace came first, and the transformation followed. The religious system says, "Clean yourself up, then come close." Jesus says, "Come close and I'll clean you up." That's the entire difference between condemnation and grace, and it's the difference that actually sets you free instead of keeping you performing. So let's bring these 4 signs together for a second, because once you see the pattern, it's hard to unsee. It starts with treating faith like a checklist instead of a relationship. A hamster wheel that keeps you busy but never actually moves you forward. That checklist mentality turns into gatekeeping people instead of loving them like Jesus did, searching the scriptures while missing the one they point to. The gatekeeping shifts into measuring attendance instead of chasing real transformation. A full calendar sitting on top of an empty tank. And all of that pressure eventually forces you into hiding behind a mask, terrified to be honest about your own struggles, even with the people who are supposed to be safest. 4 signs, 1 root cause. Religion focused on performance instead of intimacy with a living, present Jesus. Here's the core difference to remember as we close this out. Religion serves an institution. Following Jesus means abiding in a person. John 15:4 says to remain in him the way a branch remains in a vine, not the way an employee clocks in for a shift and clocks back out. A branch doesn't perform for the vine, it doesn't hit quotas or maintain a streak, it just stays connected, and the life flows naturally from that connection. That's the picture Jesus gave us, and it's the exact opposite of everything we just walked through. So here are 3 practical steps to actually strip away the performance and rebuild that connection starting today. First, replace your checklist quiet time with an honest conversation. Stop reading for information and start talking to God like He's actually in the room, because He is. Tell Him what you're really thinking, not the polished version. Ask Him the question you've been afraid to ask out loud. A relationship grows through honesty, not through completing a reading plan on autopilot. Second, trade gatekeeping for grace. The next time you're tempted to correct someone's theology online or judge someone's walk from a distance, ask yourself if Jesus would have led with correction or with compassion, and follow His lead instead of your first instinct. Grace doesn't mean truth doesn't matter. It means truth is delivered by someone who's already sat down next to the person instead of shouting from behind a gate. Third, find one person you actually trust and tell them the truth about a struggle you've been hiding behind the mask. It doesn't have to be everyone. It doesn't have to be public. It just has to be honest. Healing starts the moment the mask comes off, not the moment you finally have it all together. Because you were never going to have it all together on your own in the first place. If any of these 4 signs described you, you're not alone and you're not disqualified from His presence. You're just being invited back into something real. Drop a comment and let me know which of these 4 hit closest to home, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next as we keep breaking free from burnout and back into the presence of Jesus.